Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 3 Civil Rights Heroes Lesson 20. Today, our content question or our pizza bite question is what's happening in the story of Ruby Bridges? So, we were introduced to our second text about Ruby Bridges, and this was called The Story of Ruby Bridges. Now, the first text that we read was Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story. I want you to think about these two texts. I want you to tell me in the Ed puzzle what is something that is the same about both of these texts. Tell me in the Ed puzzle. So, something that I noticed that was the same about both of these texts is that it talks about Ruby's first day of school. Both texts talk about Ruby's first day of school. It also talks about Ruby, right? It talks about Ruby Bridges' experience in going to the William France Elementary School. Now I want you to think about how these books are written. We know that Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story was written in first person point of view. That means that Ruby was the one telling her story. When an author is telling their own story, that is called an autobiography. Say that with me, autobiography. When you are the one writing your story, writing a story about you. The story of Ruby Bridges is a biography. That means that someone else told Ruby's story, but used information from other sources like Ruby, her mother, her teacher, Mrs. Henry. So a biography is telling the story about a person. And they use resources from people, from other books, from other sources to help tell that person's story. So I want you to think about the information you just learned from me. How is Ruby Bridges Goes to School and the story of Ruby Bridges different? What is one thing that is really different about these two texts and how they were written? What is different about the way they were written? Tell me in the puzzle. So our first text was written from Ruby Bridges, right? It was written from her heart and from her mind. The story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles was written by another person telling Ruby's story, writing a book about Ruby. Just like Martin Luther King Jr. in the March on Washington, that was about Dr. King. I Have a Dream was the words that were coming from Dr. King. Those were his words. And we heard words like I, me, we, us, together. So sometimes when you are reading a text, you are going to be reading autobiographies, informational texts when the author tells her own story. And biographies are informational texts that tell about a person's story. All right, so our pizza bite question today is what's happening in the story of Ruby Bridges? So with our last writing task, we used the scape chart. And we used the scape chart to talk about the setting, the characters, the actions, the problem, and the ending. So we are going to be reading the text for a second time. Remember, we reread texts to get a better understanding about what is happening and what we can learn from the text. So I am going to be reading this text again, and we're going to stop every once in a while for you to answer a question in the Ed puzzle about your scape. All right, are you ready? Get your bodies in a place where you can stay focused and not get distracted. And let's figure out what's happening in this text. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops. So my daddy lost his job. And that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At that time, Black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The Black children were not able to receive the same education as white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's laws. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 Black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDonough 19. 6-year-old Ruby was sent to the 1st grade in the William Frantz Elementary School. All right, we're going to pause for a second. Let's think about our scape chart. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me what is going to be the setting of our story. What is the setting of Ruby's story? Tell me in the puzzle. So we know that the setting is in the year 1960. That is a setting that tells us when this is happening. And we know that the place that most of the story is going to take place is at William Frantz Elementary School. Now I want you to think about your characters. Who are the characters that we have learned about so far in this story? Tell me in the puzzle. So far we have been introduced to Ruby Bridges, our main character, who this story is all about. And we've been introduced to her family, her mother and her father. And we've also been introduced to her siblings too. Now, we've talked about our setting. We've talked about the characters we've learned about so far. I want you to think about the actions that are about to happen. On this page of the text, what do we learn that the judge has ordered? What has the judge ordered for the 4 Black girls to do? What are the 4 Black girls going to do? Tell me in the puzzle. So one of the actions of Ruby is that she is going to be sent to William Frantz Elementary School, which was a white-only elementary school. That is the first action we learn about Ruby. Let's keep going. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. We sat there and prayed to God, Ruby's mother said, that we'd all be strong and we'd have courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl. And she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the Frantz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want Black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. We're going to pause. Who are the other characters that we learn about on this page? Tell me in the puzzle. So this page introduces us to the mob of white people, to the large crowd of white people that are angry. And it also introduces us to the marshals that walk Ruby into school. Now I want you to think, what is another action that we see on this page? What is another action that Ruby is doing on this page? Tell me in the puzzle. She is walking to school for the first time. Now we're going to see a little bit more about what she is experiencing. But now I want you to think about the problem. What is the problem in Ruby's story? What is the problem that we learn about on this page? Tell me in the puzzle. So in the text, it tells us the people carried signs that they didn't want Black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. So, people did not want a black child going to a whites only school. There were people that wanted segregation to stay in place. So that is Ruby. That is the problem. Ruby is being faced with this injustice every day that she's going to school. Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the France elementary school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There's another character. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and worked well at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I'd ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, an empty building. What is another action that we learn about Ruby? We know that she was sent to William Frantz Elementary School. We know that she had to walk past an angry mob of people every day. What is something that she does once she gets into the building? What do we learn about Ruby's time in the school building? Tell me in the puzzle. We learn on this page that she learns alone with Mrs. Henry. People took their kids out of school because they didn't want their white children going to school with a black child. So Ruby, we're learning that she is facing injustices, but she is also responding to those injustices. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, said Mrs. Henry, how she went by those mobs and sat here all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she gradually began to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what had happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. "I didn't stop and talk with them," she said. "Ruby, I saw you talking," Mrs. Henry said. "I saw your lips moving." "I wasn't talking," said Ruby. "I was praying. I was praying for them." Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from the school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. As she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you can forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So, what is the ending to this story? What does Ruby do at the end of the story? Tell me in the puzzle. It says that she prays for them and that she asks for forgiveness for those people. Could you imagine walking past that angry mob of people that wanted to hurt you, that wanted to say evil, mean things to you, and then forgiving them? Think about how hard that would be. All right, Smarties. So let's look at our scape chart. Let's see if we can give a big thumbs up to our answers. So our setting of our story was the William Frantz Elementary School. It took place in the state of New Orleans and in the year of 1960. We got that. All right, our characters are Ruby, Mrs. Henry, and the angry crowd. We met some other characters in the story. We met Ruby's parents and the Marshalls as well. The actions, the first action that we learned was that the judge said black children should go to the white school. And so he sent Ruby and the 3 other black girls to the white only schools. And then Ruby, the other action of Ruby was that she started going to the school. The problem in the story was that there was an angry crowd of people that didn't want a black child going to a white-only school. Towards the end, another problem we face is that Ruby stopped in the middle of the crowd to do what? What did she do? She prayed for the angry mob. And the Marshalls were scared. And at the end, we learned that Ruby prays for those people and she asks forgiveness for them. So, my second grade Smarties, as you are watching this, you are going to have a chance tomorrow, it will be Friday when you do this, that you are going to be retelling the story of Ruby Bridges. Now, we can use this scape chart to not only organize our writing, but organize our thoughts as we retell this story out loud. So we can start by talking about the setting and our characters. That can be the first chunk of us retelling. Then we could talk about the actions of our characters, the problem that the character faces, and how our character responds to those problems, and then finish our retelling with an ending. So you can use this scape chart to organize your thoughts for retelling verbally with your words out loud or with your written words. All right, so yesterday in our last lesson, we talked about exploded moments and how that is an important feature with adding to narrative writing. So in our last writing task, you wrote a narrative from Ruby's perspective. Now remember, narratives are texts that tell stories. They have story elements, settings, characters, actions, problems, and endings. And we can talk about what is happening and when this is happening by using words like today, then, finally, now. Remember, those are called temporal words. Temporal words, they tell us when something is happening. And then, after we have added those elements, making sure that we add all the important parts of the story, we can add those exploded moments. Remember, exploded moments are when we describe the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions of our characters. So let's look at a page in the text. We are going to be thinking about an exploded moment from this page in the text. We are going to reread this section and look at the pictures. We're going to think about our scape, our settings, our characters, the actions, the problem, and the ending. We're going to think about Ruby's thoughts, her feelings, and her actions. And then when it's time for us to write our narrative, once we have done those first 3 steps, then we write the narrative that combines our scape and our exploded moments. So let's look at this page in the text. Every day for weeks that turn into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the France elementary school surrounded by marshals. Wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail, Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. All right, so let's think about our scape first. What is the setting in this event? What is the setting of this event? Where is this taking place, Smarties? It's taking place at the France school. Who are the characters on this page? Who do we learn about on this page? We learn about Ruby. We learn about the marshals and the angry crowd of people. What is the problem? What is the problem in this event? I want you to tell me in the puzzle, what is the problem that we learn about in this event? People are yelling at Ruby to go away. They don't want her at this school. What are the actions of the characters? What does Ruby do? Look at the last sentence. It says, Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. So our actions of our main character is that she would hurry through this crowd of angry people and not say a word. What do the marshals do? What are the actions of the marshals on this page? Tell me in the ed puzzle, what actions are the marshals doing? It says the marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. So they were protecting Ruby, and they were going to tell the angry mob that if they didn't stop, they would be arrested. And what is the angry crowd of people doing in this section of the text, in this event? What does the angry group of people do? Tell me in the puzzle. It says that they march up and down the street. It says that they shout at Ruby and they push toward her. And we know that the ending is Ruby would be rushed into the school, into safety. Now I want you to think, that's our scape. I want you to think about, this page doesn't tell us the exact words that Ruby is thinking and feeling, but we can use our scape to dig a little deeper and think about what she was feeling and what she was thinking. So let's think about when she first sees that crowd marching. What do you think Ruby is thinking and feeling when she sees the crowd marching? What do you think is going in her head when she sees them in front of the school building? Tell me in the puzzle. She's probably feeling intimidated. She's confused. She's confused about why they are doing this. And she's probably fearful. She's fearful of what could happen to her. What do you think she is thinking or feeling about the marshals? What do you think she feels about the marshals? She probably feels safe. But she's also thinking, if I were Ruby, because it says the state and the city police wouldn't help her, so the president had to send marshals to keep her safe. Maybe she was thinking, what if the marshals don't come back? What if they stop helping me? What if they stop protecting me? But she was probably feeling safe when they were with her. And what do you think Ruby was thinking or feeling once she got into the building, once she got into the school? What do you think she was thinking or feeling once she was hurried into the school building? Tell me in the puzzle. She was probably feeling relief. But remember, it says that she wanted to cry, but she would stay brave, that she would keep being brave. So there was probably a relief, but she was probably also feeling sadness, right? Sad about people yelling at her, pushing toward her, trying to hurt her. So Smarties, as we are not only just thinking about our escape, we need to think about what our characters are experiencing and feeling. All right, Smarties, and let's wrap up this lesson with a deep dive. So we're going to be talking about word relationships. Now, remember, there are words that can have similar meanings, but some words have stronger meanings and some words have weaker meanings, and then some words are kind of in the middle of a strong and a weak meaning. All right, so let's look at this sentence in the text. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. What does the word irritated mean? If you are irritated about something, what does that mean? Tell me in the puzzle. So if I'm irritated about something, that means I'm a little upset or something is bugging me. If I am irritated about something, that means something is bothering me. But look at these words. What if those words were replaced with Ruby became angry? Or Ruby became furious? I want you to think. In this page in the text, would the words angry and furious work here? Do you think Ruby became angry, really mad at Mrs. Henry? Or furious, like she wanted to scream at Mrs. Henry? No. So all of these words, irritated, angry, furious, they have similar meanings, right? So they have similar meanings of being upset. Irritated is our weakest way of being upset. Angry is I'm upset, but if I am furious, that means I am really upset. So those words all have a similar meaning, but some words have stronger meanings than other words. So for this sentence, irritated makes sense, right? Ruby was a little upset, but she wasn't angry. She wasn't furious. She wasn't ready to scream or walk away. She was just a little bothered by what Mrs. Henry said. So we could say that irritated is our weakest, angry is our in the middle, and furious is our strongest. Let's look at some other words and see if we can think of which ones would be the weakest to the strongest. All right, so hateful, bad, and mean. First, let's think about which one is the strongest. Which one has the strongest meaning? Hateful, bad, or mean? Tell me what you're thinking in the puzzle. Which one has the strongest meaning? Hateful, right? If I am hateful, that is the meanest I can be. I am being the meanest person I can be. Which word would go in the middle then? Mean, right? I'm being mean. I am a mean person. And then which one would be the least strongest? Bad, right? I can be a bad person, but then I can also be a mean person, or I can be a hateful person. So those words all have similar meanings. Those are all negative ways to describe someone, right? Bad, if you're bad, I mean, that describes how you are negatively. If you're mean, ooh, that is a negative description. But the worst would be hateful. All right, let's do one more. All right. Now I want us to think about strength. Think about the meanings of strength. Mighty, strong, and powerful all describe strength. I want you to think about Hercules. Would Hercules, for the strongest meaning, would he be mighty? Would he be strong? Or would he be powerful? Which one do you think is the strongest meaning? Mighty, right? If I am mighty, I am the strongest I can be. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me which one is the weakest meaning of strength, strong or powerful. Which one would have the weakest meaning? Tell me in the puzzle. Strong, right? Strong describes strength, but powerful is a stronger word than strong. So, Smarties, as we are thinking about how we can make our writing more interesting, we can add these words with stronger meanings and words with weaker meanings to let our reader know what is really happening in this text. All right, Smarties, that is going to be it for today's lesson. Remember to keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things, and good learners also respond to injustice. Happy learning, Smarties.